In the early stages of this project, I didn't really have anything figured out. It was really just an experiment built around the main character of my story and his direwolf. Here's how it came together. When I started this piece, I had the idea that maybe the character is standing in front of the wolf, and the wolf could be posed on maybe some kind of a rock or boulder behind him. And they're both kind of looking in the direction of the camera, but not directly at it. Maybe they're looking elsewhere. I thought that would create some cool mystery for the viewer to kind of wonder as to like what they might be looking at. A majority of the setup in Blender was just kind of making sure that the characters were posed properly. The wolf's mouth was open, so I maybe, closed that. I also played with his tail maybe being up instead of resting down, but in the moment that just kind of seemed a little distracting. So I just wanted to just dial that before I moved on to the rest of the scene. If you're wondering why these clips may seem a little cut, it's just because I cut out parts that were a little redundant, just more of the same stuff going on. So here I'm just playing with different tree species that I have in my collection. I'm just trying to fill the scene. I had this idea in mind that the character and the wolf are set in a location where they're on this cliff maybe, and the trees are kind of just behind them. But there's enough open space where it shows the sky behind them, as well as maybe some mountains. So I wanted to just kind of get that set up and move things around until I'm happy with it. At this point in time, I'm also thinking about the silhouette of the character and the wolf. I know that I'll probably end up changing the sky in the paint over process. So I want to make sure that not too much of the trees are behind them in this stage. I can always erase them later, but my thinking at this point was I want to leave some open space there for the character and not take away from them. The key here is just moving the trees in a way where the silhouettes complement the composition, and everything is still kind of tied to leading your eye back toward the character and the wolf. Some of these trees, they do come with all the leaves on them, so I wanted to delete the leaves or the pines off the trees to maybe add some variety in the trees behind. Maybe some of them are just completely bare. They could be dead pines or something like that, but just to add some more contrast in the forest behind them and some variety. And at this point, I kind of just start adding a few more lights, maybe playing around with what's possible there. Maybe I could introduce some more lights to assist in pulling your eye a bit more into the scene. Because the wolf and the character are the only ones with lights on them, I wanted to see if I could maybe introduce a few more lights to brighten up the scene a bit more and make it a little bit more interesting. I had the idea here that I could maybe rotate some of the trees in the background. Just thinking that, in forests, occasionally you will have dead trees that are kind of fallen over, or they're just completely dead from like a storm or something like that. So I could also use that as some kind of compositional aid to help move your eye through the scene some more. So that's kind of just what I was playing with here. Here I'm just adding final details, maybe stuff that's a little out of place, or moving a few things around, nothing crazy. Doing a little bit of sculpting on the rocks there to just get everything ready before I render the scene out into Photoshop. All right, I was pretty much happy with the scene in Blender. This is what the render ended up looking like. And now it's time to kind of push everything in Photoshop. Now, the first thing I do generally when it comes to a paint over is I'll start introducing a sky or background. The sky for me is always the part of the piece that really drives the rest of the environment and scene. So I just want to make sure that I kind of have an idea of what I'm going for there in the very early stages of paint over. I did have the idea of maybe playing with a sky that had some kind of golden hour lighting where the sky was setting and illuminating the clouds in the background. Here, the wolf had some background artifacts still tied to the selection, so I was just erasing those here. Now, this is a pretty important part to me. This is where I use Acvis oil paint, and this pretty much just gets rid of a lot of the 3D-ness of the render. It adds like a nice oil paint texture to the piece. I use one of the built-in Photoshop filters as well. I think it's dry brush, just to further reduce the 3D-ness of the render. And typically what I'll do is I'll actually perform those actions, and then I will use a mask with a cloud render on it to only show some of it on the piece. I don't want it to be completely 100%. So I'll use a layer mask to do that. And then here I'm just kind of playing with maybe lightening up the bottom of the piece a bit so that the trees don't disappear into darkness. So here I'm actually doing the ACVIS to the sky as well, just to get rid of some detail and put more attention on the foreground character and the wolf. Now here I'm actually kind of thinking maybe the cloud with the highest amount of light and contrast on it will silhouette the head of the character just to make him pop some more. Another thing I'll do is I'll bring in a hue saturation filter so that I can make sure that my values are correct. So I usually just turn that all the way down to grayscale, and then I can check my values better while I work on the piece. Another thing is I think the Z-depth pass or the mist pass from Blender is probably one of the most important render passes you could put into a piece, just because it gives you so much control over the depth of the image and adding atmosphere and separating the values in the paintover process. At this point, I'm just trying to get a selection of the main boulder rock behind the character so that I can start adding some more textures and paint over to that. I really didn't like how the edge of the rock was kind of blending with the trees in the bottom of the piece, so I just wanted to add some more contrast there just to make it pop a little more. Just doing some character work here. I really didn't like how the character's sword was blending in with the lighting of the wolf behind. So I wanted to darken the handle of the sword, maybe brighten up the blade, just playing with some different types of lighting scenarios to get the character to pop. I must have created so many different variations of Z-depth passes here, but having that original layer gave me the control that I needed to separate certain parts of the piece for adding atmosphere and separating the different elements. At this point, I'm thinking that there should be some kind of hillside or landscape in the background. Maybe it's a mountain or something along those lines. Originally, I didn't plan on anything being there, but in the paint over process, I realized that it was kind of feeling a little empty there. So I felt maybe adding some mountains could fill in that space. While I was working on this area, I actually thought it might be kind of cool if I introduced some kind of structures back there as well. Just a little bit of storytelling there, just to add another subject in the environment. Maybe there's some kind of ruins or some kind of structure in the background. It creates a little bit more sense of wonder. When I'm working on a piece, I'll always change different areas of the piece that I work on. I generally don't like to work on one area too long just because I kind of start losing interest. So I find it's more fun to switch it up and work on different areas throughout the process. I'm trying to add some texture to the rock here just so it's not so bare. At one point, it kind of started looking like blood splatter. So I wanted to make sure that it definitely didn't look like that. Maybe it was some kind of lichen growth or something like that, since this is a forest scene. Here, I'm just kind of fixing part of the wolf that I didn't like. It was too jagged from the render. So smoothing that out and adding some fur. And because I did that, it's going to affect the Z-depth fog that I've added. So I need to fix that as well. Here I'm playing with darkening the entire scene in front of the sky. I felt that maybe the trees didn't have enough contrast in them. So just seeing what happens if I do that, seeing what kind of results I get. Also, when I checked the values of the hue set layer, I noticed the rock seemed a little dark, so wanted to brighten that up. So while I'm looking at this hue set, I can see that the brightest highlight is behind the character on the rock, which is kind of the intention. And then also maybe adding some brightness to the clouds in the background in certain parts, just to bring your eye toward the characters some more. I also wanted to add some brightness behind the main foreground tree on the right, just to create a little bit more visual interest there. Here I'm kind of playing with some ambient light, maybe some kind of sun ray or something like that. If you are enjoying this video, I would definitely appreciate it if you hit like and subscribe. Totally don't have to. It's totally up to you, but that really helps me a lot in making these videos. Thought at this point I would maybe add some grime to the character's face, maybe a scar or something like that. Add some storytelling of some previous battles that he's had. So here I'm just adding some contrast in the cape. It's a little muddy behind his arm and the wolf. I wanted to add some highlights to his cape just to create some separation there. Here I'm just doing an overview, just looking at the piece, seeing what needs to be done. I felt like the mountains in the background were a little too flat looking, so I wanted to bring in some actual photos of forest to create some more texture there. Here I copied the foreground tree on the right to add in another tree to fill in that space. I didn't like how empty it was, so below this main tree, I wanted to add another variation to fill that in. And at the same time, just add some extra branches and detail to that tree so it didn't look too similar. You'll see me flipping the image constantly. That's just my way of checking for mistakes while I'm working on the piece. If I've been staring at the piece for too long, I'll generally flip it, and then some other mistakes might pop out that I didn't notice before. I was thinking of adding the curved tail for the wolf in there again, just because I didn't really like how empty that area was. I thought maybe curving the wolf's tail would add some more interest there. I wasn't a fan of these ruins that I painted in, so I decided to add a photo of a castle of some kind that I had just to see what that might look like. I actually ended up liking it more, so I kept it. Here, I'm just kind of making sure that it blends in the scene properly. And the lighting was already kind of spot on and had some pretty cool lighting on it. So just wanted to dress that up some more and bring down the contrast so it didn't pull too much attention away from the main subjects. At this point, just doing another pass on the piece, seeing what else it needs. It's getting close to being ready for finalization, so I start kind of going through gradient maps here, seeing what maybe I can do with that, or um, my usual post-processing routine. There's another trick where I like to add a glowing line effect to the painting. It actually makes it look a little more like a painting. So I always throw that into the workflow of the post processing. I didn't like how the rock in the foreground wasn't really touched. That was a Megascans asset that I used. So I wanted to introduce some photos to break that up a bit. I ended up changing the color of the rocks in the foreground. I didn't like how warm the rest of the piece was, so I wanted to bring in some other colors there. I also thought that the foreground rocks needed some sunlight. Here's another trick where I blur the whole image and then I will go into the layer style properties and adjust it so the painting has some bloom. I thought that added a nice dreamy effect to the piece. I'm just playing with the glowing line effect here, seeing what that looks like. At this point, the photo texture of this rock that I brought in, I felt was the piece that was missing for the main boulder behind the character. It was missing some detail, and I just felt like this kind of forest, mossy growth on the rock would add some nice, subtle detail to the rock. I really didn't like how behind the wolf and the rock next to the tree, it was kind of blending a bit too much. So I wanted to find a way to introduce some atmosphere there or just some more separation. I didn't like the hue of the light that was on the structure in the background, so I just wanted to adjust that so that it fit the lighting on the sky as well. I hadn't really touched the cape of the character yet here, so I wanted to just clean that up and get rid of some of those elements. If you've made it this far into the video, I really appreciate the support. It means the world that you guys are interested in this kind of stuff. If you want access to more of the files from the project, those will be on my Patreon listed below. I wanted to add another texture to the rock, the bottom right of it. It was a little empty there, so I thought this crack could maybe be a nice little detail. This is just nitpicky stuff at this point, just checking the before and after of the render and the painting. And yeah, just getting ready to wrap up this painting. These are the kind of moments where maybe you should have finished the piece earlier, but this is the type of stuff that I like to do at the very end or on a piece when I just feel like maybe it needs a little bit more till I'm actually happy with it. Not every piece is going to be like this, but there are those moments where I just think that spending that extra time is worth it because it brings the piece to a point where you're fulfilled and happy to call it finished. And here is the finished result. Again, it means a lot that you guys stuck with me through the end here. If you learned something or if you want to see something else in the future, let me know in the comments below. Be happy to put something together. But in the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Take care.